Hello, and welcome to the Kelcast, the Hearthstone Arena podcast, where we try to get better without cursing. I'm Keludar, a longtime Infinite Arena leaderboard player and streamer on Twitch. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, another Arena leaderboard player, Kelnable. If you want to find us on social media, you can search for Keludar, that's Keludar, on Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter. So, Kellen, what are we looking at this week?
Well, Kel, we are looking at a new strategy theory, or maybe an old one. I don't know. You've been bumping around in your brain for a long time. But we're going to go deep on something you're calling the "it's never always" principle. It's an idea you've had for a long time, though, right? It's something you're really into and have been put a lot of thought into.
Yeah, this is something that this is a drafting series that I've kind of considered talking about for a long time. And it's something that I've been kind of like thinking about for a long time, but never really formulating into like something I could talk about. So this will be fun. All right. So with that, let's get on with the show.
Yeah, so I'm going to start things off with asking you some questions because this is your baby. This is your idea. So I'm going to kind of try and pull the threads of the thoughts out of your brain and see where we can get. So before we get into like the principle itself, Kel, what is an always card? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, oh, sure. Yeah. So an always card is just kind of this whole thought process of where somebody looks at during the draft, somebody looks at a card and they're like, oh, well, it's always Claw Machine, or it's always Proto Drake, or it's always Fireball, or it's always Mind Control. Like, and it's something that I actually hear, I've even heard streamers do this. I've heard other players say this. I heard chat say this a lot. So yeah, it's something that I hear quite often.
Yeah, I've definitely heard people use the phrase, it's always blank here. It's always this, it's always that when they're drafting. So is your idea agreeing with the idea that some cards should always be picked, or are you kind of like on the other side thinking about, well, I don't know, it's not always, it can never always be that card?
Yeah, the whole idea is not so much the fact that it isn't most of the time, maybe even this card or this card, but the problem is that it's the mindset behind it. So one of the things that really frustrates me, and I do this on Twitch a lot, where somebody will be like you're gonna hear me use Claw Machine a lot just because it's kind of one of the most common ones I hear. So I'll hear someone, they see Claw Machine come up as a pick and they're like, oh, it's always Claw Machine. And they get frustrated because I'm taking a while and I'm thinking about it and they don't understand what I'm doing. And I'm like, and I literally asked them, well, why is it always this card? And they can't tell me. They don't even have a reason why it's always. They just assume it's always. And that's one of my biggest issues. Is that you're not really putting any thought behind it. You're using either a tier list or you're using what you see other streamers do or what other people say. And I feel like that actually limits what you're capable of as a player. And it also is limiting you growing into your own style and what you like to do and what makes you a good player too. So
yeah. It sounds like it seems like you're talking about cards that are so good that players ignore all the other factors. They see this card that's definitely a good card, things that are really high level, you always want them in their deck, and I mean that in a different way than what you mean with always, but cards you would love to have in your deck, but they don't always fit into the strategy you're going for, the cards you've already drafted, or the deck you're looking to produce at the end of the draft, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, and the thing is one of the most common questions that I think if you talk to any arena streamer they hear about is you'll hear a player that, he's starting out in arena and he's starting to get better, right? And then there's definitely a couple walls that you hit, right? So like I feel like, if you're just a good card player, like you're good at those type of things, you can average 3 or 4 wins in arena without even really sweating it. Just by general gameplay, you can win a decent amount of games if you're smart and you know what you're doing. But then, like, I find these people that are, like, on the up and up. Like, one person I always think about is Rusko, because he was always asking about, like, what is this card? What is this card? What is this card? And I think he actually kind of defines what this is, because in a way, he always is asking questions. He's never assuming anything. He wants to know what people think. And I think that's kind of the whole principle, is that, like, you challenge yourself to think about why it could or could not be, so that you don't want to get into this singular mindset where it's always, it's just funny how we're using the word so much, but yeah, it's not always this card. Like, you don't want to get into that singular mindset because you're limiting opportunities to maybe get more wins or, improve as a player. And kind of back to the whole wall thing I said about players improving, that's usually what happens is they look at they get like Hearth Arena or a tier list, and that gets them to like maybe 5 wins, right? Like, or something like that. It's 5.5. And they're getting there because now they're picking a lot of the best cards. So they're improving because now they have like better cards in their deck. So they have more of an arsenal. Then go ahead. Go ahead.
So I was gonna say, so you're saying this is more like a leveling up concept. Like when you first start, you don't really know what's going on. So you find the resources that work. You find a tier list, you find Hearth Arena, you find things that give you a rated system of what cards are good. And so you just always take the high one. You always take the card that is the highest rated, whether or not it's the best for your deck or its synergy with the other cards. And honestly, if you're bad, if you haven't had a lot of experience, let me rephrase that. That's what I really mean. Then you're not going to be able to win unless you use some resources like that. Right. But once you've achieved the highest win rate you can get just off those picks, now you can start using your brain, your own mindset, your own strategy, your experience in the game, and the things that you've learned yourself to make picks that are different than what the tier list or what the rating system or whatever you're looking at says is the best pick. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you definitely, because once you start getting into that mindset of breaking away from the singular mindset we're talking about, where you're just taking what makes sense most of the time, you start to you start to break out of that and you start to question, you start to learn about why the cards work. Because like going back to Claw Machine. So Claw Machine is really good to remove cards. It does card draw. The reason it's so strong is that because it inherently does so many things that you need as an arena deck to win. It's a hard removal. It's a rush card. It's a draw card. It's a buff card. And it gives you value. It does almost everything so well at once. So that's one of the reasons why it's very, very, very good. But when you start to question like about each of these cards, when you see a pick, then you start to actually learn why is it that this card wins all the time? And why is it that, this card doesn't work most of the time? And then once you get past that, you start to figure out like, well, maybe there's certain situations where this card actually is really good. And we'll get into that a little later with some of the cards we decided we want to kind of use to like discuss this theory that I have. But the simple way to explain it is more about breaking your mindset and stop. You don't want to ever approach anything in life with just like, well, you always do this, you always do that. You want to have an open mind. And I think that it's important, especially in Arena, because you're piecing together kind of this like, Frankenstein of cards, right? You don't have like a very perfect deck like you do in Constructed. You have to kind of build it together, right? So, you kind of need to have an open mind to make that work. When you're not getting all the strongest cards that you want, you have to figure out a way to make it work if you want to do well. So that's, So you're saying that if you stick with this mindset, if you're kind of in it for a long period of time, when you're in that always take the best card, always mindset, you're actually spewing out win percentage. You're not able to get to the highest. You're kind of like putting a ceiling or a cap on the most wins you can get with any deck, because you're not achieving the full value of a deck and you're not taking advantage of each card that you're offered. You're only taking the card that is always the best pick or the highest rated. Yeah. Or some people, sometimes there's play styles where people stick into that too, where I know a lot of players that stick with the consistent cards, right? Or the ones that don't punish them or the ones that don't feel bad. But by limiting those type of cards, you're actually, I go back to this example a lot when I talk, but I just think it's a great one. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't apply as well right now. But one example I like to talk about is Bittertide Hydra. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because there's a lot of people out there that said, you never take this card. Like, it's just bad. There's too many times you do die to it, right? And but the thing is,
or to put it in context of exactly what we're talking about, you always take the card that isn't Bittertide Hydra, right?
Right, exactly. And the thing is that it's definitely true that out of a couple runs, you might get Volcanoed or you might get Shivard and you might lose the game because of it. But you also, if you have the option to have an 80% chance to win 5 more games or a 10% chance to lose 1 extra game, it all becomes down to those type of things. And those are the things that I think a lot of the high level players, like we kind of just do this naturally. Like we don't really talk about this. Like we don't, it's hard to really put it into like, I'm trying to put it into a phrasing that maybe helps some people grow, but it's not the easiest thing to explain because it's kind of complex, you know. But
yeah, so it's more about a card that you would normally always take, like Claw Machine, has X% value or whatever to your deck to getting it better or to winning to your total wins. But a card that is worse than Claw Machine in a generic, like in a vacuum, might have a higher percent than X, so X plus 2 or something percent chance of winning in your deck. And if you just take the Claw Machine every time without thinking, you're missing out on that 2% chance that you get from a card that is not rated as high as Claw Machine, but in your deck that you have 14 cards for already gains you 2% above Claw Machine.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this in a short time here, but one of the things is just you want to look at each card individually, because a lot of times what happens is I call it tunnel vision. You know, you see the good card, you see the fireball, you see, you know, a lot of times in Priest people want mind control. They see that card and they just know that it's going to be good in their deck, and they just kind of stop there, right? They just are like, oh, well, it's, you know, it's always this card because it's so good. And in many cases, maybe 95% of the time, even maybe that is true. Maybe it is most of the time what you would take, but you're also you're actually missing an opportunity to like think about cards too. Because one of the things I think that's great is that I do now. I take a lot of time, 30 minutes sometimes for a draft or longer. But you know, even by not taking a card and evaluating it, you're actually learning because you're actually starting to think about how it works in the deck and all that kind of stuff. So I think slowing down and really thinking through like a look at a certain selection and where you're at and think about how it affects the gameplay, I think can really help you improve in the long run. And maybe it won't take you as long in the long run to make these type of decisions, but you know, going back again to the wall comment, you know, when you want to go from, I think the biggest wall that I hear about is people at about 5.5 or 6 wins and they want to go infinite. That jump from that point to 7 wins can sometimes literally come down to 1 or 2 decisions in a run or 1 or 2 decisions in a draft. And it's not necessarily that the player that's a 6-win average or a 7-win average is that much different. It's just a couple different little things.
So here's one thing you mentioned a second ago is you were talking about like Mind Control and Claw Machine as 2 cards that people often want to take, or Fireball.
Right.
And I think one of the things that you're talking about there is it's not, and this is kind of against the mindset of what you're saying, but it's never bad to take those cards in a vacuum. But even though those cards will improve the quality of your deck, it's possible that there's a card that is even better in a pack.
Exactly, or even better for the deck. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why understanding one of the big differences I remember I wrote in my notes was that like, so you know, like I said, a 3 to 5 win player, they kind of just look at the cards. What's the best card? They take the best card. They might, at like a little bit higher level, they might think about curve, right? They might think about, oh, well, this card fits my curve, so I should maybe think about not taking it. That's kind of like the first step away from getting there to the right place. But then the next step, like the really high level players, what they do is they consider win conditions. They prioritize what type of cards are important, like removal, curve, AoE, value, that kind of thing. And they also know the overall meta itself and what works. They might take a card, like I definitely consider like the fact that I see a lot of Priests right now and I see a lot of Paladin. So I look at things like Acidic Swamp Ooze and I take it more often than I would generally, knowing that information. So there are some things that help you to break out of that. And some of that's just experience, but you know, if you'd really talk to some of the other, you know, I talk to I'm friends with a lot of high level players, and I get a lot of information just talking to you guys. Sometimes you and me will text about different situations or about a certain card. And I remember very early on in the meta, we'll talk about this later. Like I was like, man, like, I don't know, Knife Vendor doesn't seem so bad. Like I was taking it in Hunters and it was just, I was wrecking people. Like it was so obvious that it was like winning games. So, you know, and it's dangerous to say like you never take this card or you always take this one. Like that's just I think it's a very dangerous mindset. And I think if you can think about getting out of that, like you can definitely grow.
Yeah, I mean, only Sith steal in absolutes, not Hearthstone Arena players.
Exactly. You got this. So again, the next question then is like, how do we actually break out of the mindset effectively? Like, how do we actually take what we're saying and actually apply it to drafting? Yeah. And that's what I want to talk about next. And so basically the first thing you want to do during the draft is like, you get your first draft pick, right? And the first thing you need to do is you need to look at each card separate from the other one, right? It's good to compare, but it's also to look at what that card is by itself. Because I think when you start comparing the cards too much, you're like, oh, this card's just better. So I don't really think about this one, right? But actually look at each card and really think about each card. Like, this is going really in depth, and maybe it's not worth your time to do this, and maybe you don't care to do this and you don't have to. But if you want to get better, this is definitely something you can do to get better. So there's like, I kind of wrote down a list of questions of things that I kind of do this like naturally without thinking about it. But these are things that when you're evaluating a card singularly, like, this is the things you want to ask, is like things like this. Like, I look at this card and it's like, how does this card help or hurt my win condition? How will this card help me win or lose games? Or things like, what synergies or combos does this card create for my deck? And then you can ask questions also like curve, or like, how good is it when this card is drawn early, how good is it? And if it's drawn top deck war, like, how good is it? And then the other things you can ask too are like, what does your deck actually need to get better? There might be things your deck needs. You might need removals. You might need, value cards. You might need card draw.
Yeah.
And like, does this give me value? So those are things. So what I do is I take those questions and I look at each card by itself, right? And then I just ask those questions, and then you kind of develop a win, like kind of a pro and a con list for each card. And then you just kind of like, this is like breaking down choice making down to like really minute things, but it is important. You want to ask these questions because, I'll just bring up the example of like Knife Vendor. Like, let's say it's a hunter draft, right? And you have Knife Vendor, you have Claw Machine, and you have like Proto Drake, right? Like, those are three cards that all do different things. And you might have kind of a value deck. So maybe you don't have a lot of removal and you're worried about getting through taunts to finish out games. So in that case, the Claw Machine might be the right card. But there actually might be times where you just need a big body that can stick on the board. And so maybe the Proto Drake's right. But there's also the chance that, like, if you can't get to what those big cards do, the Knife Vendor might actually be the right pick. And the reason why is if you have a faster deck, and like, who cares about a Proto Drake if by the time you get to Proto Drake, all they're going to do is hit your face and kill you because you don't have anything. The card doesn't offer you anything at that point, because like, it just, you need the deck to do a certain thing to actually get the value of the card. So yeah, if it's not going to be often that you might draft a Knife Vendor over those cards.
But I would say, think about it this way. There's a reason they don't print a hunter card that is 4 mana, deal 4 damage, and why Kill Command is no longer in the core set. They took those cards out, and they don't print those cards because that's really dangerous for a class like Hunter to have. And we don't look at Knife Vendor like that very often because it's such a bad card in a generic average game. So, right. But if you're playing Hunter and your goal is to get them down to 0, and you have 4/1 drops, 6/2 drops, 5/3 drops, and you're planning on pressing your hero power every turn after that, the Knife Vendor goes up in value significantly, and suddenly that's a card that fits your deck. There's also
it might actually be really insane after the core set. I never thought about it that way. That's
right, and even in any case, if you're having a bunch of Jewel of N'Zoths or Great Death Rattle synergies, then maybe you're looking to create value with a card like Claw Machine. So even within the same class, two cards that have wildly different HS replay values or win rate differentials can have a similar value in the same deck, or even the worst card can jump up ahead of it if your deck is particularly tuned to desire that card.
Yeah, that's actually really true too. Yeah, exactly. Like we've been saying, it's all about an open mind. And it's all about really thinking about how the deck wins. Win condition is really important. I think it's actually one of the, it's a word we throw around a lot, but I think that it's a lot more complex sometimes than we think. Like the way that some decks win is, sometimes it's not, you have a deck that curves, but you really don't win until the late game because the way your deck's built, you have to go through like 5 or 6 swings. This meta has so swingy. You swing back and forth a few times and you end up having the Colossus and they can't deal with it, and that's how your deck is winning, you know? Or it might be that you cast Tidal Wave and you just clear their board and they have no cards left, though it doesn't seem like anybody's out of cards anymore, but you know what I'm saying. There's different ways that decks win. You know, like I said, it's meta. It's there's so many different factors, but I want people to start to, because like when we talk about developing strategies and learning on your own, part of this, and this is slightly off what we're saying a little bit, but it's also related, which is experimentation. So like, if you don't always take the claw machine, you're gonna learn more about the meta. So like, if you pass the claw machine and you take the knife vendor, maybe you're going to learn that the knife vendor just sucks in this deck. You might learn that. I mean, I'm not saying that it's always correct. I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying.
That would kind of be the antithesis of your idea, is that it's always right to take the card that isn't usually the pick. You're still going to take claw machine 95 plus % of the time.
Exactly.
But that 5% of the time where you should take the knife vendor, if you don't take it, you're missing that whatever win percentage it would add to your deck.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about my first leaderboard run. I needed to get a good enough average. I really needed I think I needed at least 6 wins or something. And I had what I thought was the worst priest deck of all time. I just thought it was terrible. But I got this little card which I've never even used in a deck since I can remember. Ancient Mage, okay? And 4 mana, 2/5, give the adjacent minions +1 spell damage. Well, it just so happened that my deck had 3 Holy Novas. And I'm sure it's a lot of luck and everything, but I can tell you that I'm not even joking. 8 of those wins at least were because of Ancient Mage. I mean, and so I would have never thought about that card, but now every time I see it, I at least consider that, because I think about that time and I'm like, well, if I had this, maybe it's not, maybe it's not as bad as I think, but I would have never even considered it, but because I kind of experimented by accident, well, it was just the best card in the pack, to be honest, in terms of a body and stuff, but it ended up being game breaking, and so
actually, that's a funny card that you mentioned that, because I remember listening to a very old Grinning Goat episode many, many years ago where they were talking about the card Kobold. Oh, shoot. The 4 mana 2/2 Kobold, Evolved Kobold, I think it's called. Yeah, that gave spell damage +2. And they were having a really deep discussion on it because that card was viewed widely as not being good. And that was true. It was not good. But they talked about situations in which you might actually want to draft that card. And just because they'd mentioned it, I suddenly viewed it as a card I would want to look at if I saw it in the pack. And then, I don't know how it happened, but 2 days after that I listened to them talk about that, I had a deck with 2 Arcane Explosions and double and 2 Blizzards. And I ended up having a pack with that card versus not Fireball, but I don't know, something much better than it. And I took that card and I won a huge percentage of my games in that run because I had Evolved Kobold. And on turn 6, I would play Evolved Kobold plus Arcane Explosion. And then on turn 7, I'd follow it up with a Blizzard. And my opponent would have no way of getting back in the game. Mm-hmm. And it's little things like that, those little synergies that a card might provide you that can allow you to win games that your deck might not otherwise be able to win. If your deck has 2 Arcane Explosions and 2 Blizzards, but you don't have a way to kill a bigger minion, you're not going to be able to pull that out. You might soften up a bunch of minions, but then their 6/6 will just finish you off afterwards. But because I had that Evolved Kobold, I was able to finish off those larger minions over 2 turns, or even mid-sized minions in 1 turn. So yeah, exactly what you're saying with Ancient Mage, cards that you would not normally pick or even look at can really go up in value if they add to the cards that are already in your deck.
Yeah, and I think sometimes some of the bad cards are really more what I would categorize as high roll cards, like you said, Evolved Kobold or Ancient Mage, all that spell damage. The body's so bad that if you don't have the extra cards with it, it's just bad. But the thing is that, sometimes your deck's so bad that I guess the other thing is what is the goal of your deck? Do you want to just try to get the most you can and not go 0-3, or do you actually want to try to get to infinite? Because sometimes some of the picks you're making really are a pick between safely getting 2 or 3 wins, or actually taking a high roll chance where you win a couple games because of some big combo. And sure, you might go 0-3 because you made the decision, but you also might go 6 or 7. So, it's kind of like you have a decision to make on how you want to, the risk reward you want to take. It's a lot of it's risk reward, obviously, but yeah, I think like the questions we went over are interesting, and I think, like I said, the biggest takeaway is just to think about the pack slower. And here's another point I thought about that I didn't mention yet, which is there is only one time where this principle doesn't apply, which is the very first pick of the draft. So when you see the very first pick, by all means, take with the best card, because that's, and you'll hear this kind of general talk that like, it's kind of like the beginner's level of like going to the next step, which is that you, during the first 10 picks, you just take the best card for the first 10, right? And then like, the next 10, you just kind of like, you maybe try to work on your curve. And then the final 10, you just kind of fill in your gaps and things that you don't have. And that's not a bad thing. Like, I think that's like a simplistic way of saying what I am saying. But what I will say is like the first pick, sure, if it's Claw Machine, there's very few things that are going to be better than it. Because every card in a vacuum, there's going to be a card that's the best in a set of cards, like an arena. There's always going to be one card that in a vacuum is just the best card, to some degree. But as each pick goes on, each time the second pick, the third pick, the fourth pick, as each pick goes on, it becomes more important to really start to evaluate what you already have taken and what you're taking, how what you're taking affects your deck. And that's how you effectively build a deck, and build it the best way you can. Because the earlier on that you start considering like where your deck is going, like I always say this too, like the faster that you can decide what your win condition of your deck is, the earlier on you can make informed decisions about what you should be looking for and why you should be taking it. So okay, so we kind of understand the principle. Can we talk? And we've already kind of talked about a few cards that we've that like Claw Machine and Knife Bender, for example. Now there are cards on the other end of the spectrum too. So cards that you, instead of always take, that you never take. And I wanted to bring up two that you'd thought of, Kathir Ritualist and Mana Wraith. Some cards that most players see in the pack and never choose, because it's the same the other direction, right? Cards that you think are terrible that you never want to take occasionally can do things for your deck that make them worthwhile or better than an average to decent card. So can you give me a situation, for example, where you would take Kathir Ritualist over a Chillwind Yeti? I'm just going to use that as the generic card. Like,
and by the way, Kathir Ritualist is the 3-mana 4/4 taunt that has Battle Cry, add a random 4-drop minion to your opponent's hand.
Yeah. And so generally the reason people say never to that card is because they really hate to give their opponent a curve drop. One of the reasons that card's really good right now, comparatively, is because of the fact that curve actually doesn't matter, especially in the mid game, as much as it usually does, because it's a lot about late game swings. But like situations where you would take that card would be, one, you just don't have a lot of 3-drops, because it's a very strong 3-drop. 3-mana 4/4s are really good. You might not want it to have taunt, but I mean, it's fine. It protects some of your early cards. But if you're a tempo deck and your win condition is to hit the face and finish the game quickly before, turn 6, 7, or 8 in that range, it's a really good card because it actually does a lot of damage. It's hard to remove. It forces your opponent to, down tempo. And frankly, though, if the threat's big enough, like a 4-drop might mean nothing to them because they might not be able to play it. They might not be able to take the pressure, So, but yeah, like that's a situation you take it, and also, pretty much it's mostly a curve filler, frankly, when you do draft it. But it's also, like we've talked about, just not. There's gonna be the one time where it gives them like, it'll give them a fishy fly or something really good, and it just like kind of screws you the game and you lose because of it. But like the other 30 games, it might just. I mean, I know this is just my personal experience, and this is probably not really the norm. But I can't tell you, I've drafted it more than probably most people, and I cannot tell you how many times I literally end games and they've never even played the card that I gave them. It's just sitting in their
makes
hand.
sense. It's kind of like, just like you talked about with Bittertide Hydra or cards with big downsides. if they don't have an opportunity to take advantage of the downside, then is that really a downside? So if your deck can create a situation, if you went 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and their 3-drop was Ritualist, protects your 1-drop and your 2-drop, they can't finish it off. Suddenly they're at 10 health and they're trying to do things. Then you drop Arcane Reaper or whatever card, and now they're dead. And it's there's a lot of ways to do that. Another card that's in that same exact vein is Mana Wraith. If your creatures are cheap enough that you can still drop them and not lose too much value on them, then Mana Wraith can be incredibly effective. For example, you go 1-drop, 2-drop, 1-drop plus Mana Wraith. Now your opponent's on 3 and they're playing their first card for the game. That's not great. They're not going to be able to catch up. If they didn't play a 2-drop and now you played Mana Wraith, they're not playing a 3-drop. So there's a lot of situations where those cards that are bad can be good in the right deck. And the cards we've mentioned are all cards that are good in decks that are specifically aggressive, but that works for control decks too. You can choose cards like, let's think of an example. How about Shooting Star? A card that is good and you actually will take all the time, but in an aggressive deck, you would rather have a very good 2-drop or 3-drop. But in a control deck, you're just going to, if you have a lot of really slow cards, you're going to skip out on that 2-drop or like great 5-drop because you just want something that can help you regain or keep control of the board early. So those cards that have a great amount of value on their own lose their value in comparison to a card that can affect the quality of your own deck or your own strategy more.
Yeah. That's so true. What you just said about like, it makes so much sense.
In context of your idea though, Kel.
Right. Yeah. Well, you're doing a good job. You're definitely supporting my theory. It's funny because it's not, I guess it's funny. I say it like a principle, like it's a theory, but like I keep saying, it's really more of it's an approach to Arena. It's a mindset because I think that we focus on like what cards we're not taking or why our deck's bad, but we're not really focusing on how we're mentally approaching things because that does affect you. I mean, I can tell you times that I've been stressed out or been distracted streaming that like my win rate's terrible. Like I'm not like that time where I had that bad streak at the beginning of the last meta. Like I was all up in arms and I just could not get any confidence and it affected my gameplay like a lot. So mindset really does matter. If you want to succeed, the people that don't get, I mean, I think of Yummy, that dude doesn't get tilted on anything. Like those are the best players are the ones that can just keep going and they don't really change because of, bad things happening or whatever. One really funny story. What is that? Do you remember the card that Rogue had that when you went face, it gave you a coin?
Oh shoot! Yeah, the Dimir Cut Purse. No, not Dimir Cut Purse. That's a Magic the Gathering.
It is a Cut Purse or something.
It is. It might just be Cut Purse.
Yeah. So anyway, I had a deck. I just wanted to share it so quick because I can't help it when I hear about Mana Wraith. I had a deck that had Cut Purse, Mana Wraith, and Pine Size Summoner, and so I had all the cards that like it gave me mana, took away mana from them, and I got a coin. That was like one of the most strong road decks I ever drafted. It's just funny because those 3 cards, like there was a couple games where I got all 3 on the board at once, and it just completely screwed my opponent, and it was pretty fair. It was pretty great. So we talked about Ritualist and Mana Wraith.
I think that covers all the examples we had.
I wanted you to talk about Broom because I wanted you to talk about Broom because that was one of the ones I had too.
Oh yeah, so that was actually initially that's funny. So for Broom, you used to think, not you used to think, but there were a number of times where we would co-op and you would want to take the Broom, and I'd be like, why do we want Broom here? And because I've never been as big of a fan of Broom in the first place anyway, so maybe it doesn't quite fit the system, but right. And it's funny now I'm higher on Broom anyways, but in any case.
It does happen.
After I mentioned it to you in our co-op, you looked at the deck and you realized all of our minions either already had Rush or weren't good if they were given Rush, and it just didn't fit with the Broom, even though Broom was the highest rated card in the pack the 2 times we were offered it. Right. And after you looked at that, you applied your own principle to the system. And you're like, yeah, Broom isn't good in our deck. And I was just using my own experience with Broom. I wasn't even looking at our deck. And you looked at our deck and realized that it's not good in this specific deck because it doesn't match up with the strategy we're trying to employ.
Yeah, and it wouldn't necessarily help us at all because, There's so much rush out there, and that is a card that I think is very almost maybe is it's a little bit more sneaky, but maybe a little bit almost taken as much as Claw Machine is. Like arena players see Broom. They've one of the reasons is because when Broom comes down and it's good, it really hurts. They might have poison. They might have I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with that card. So memories of that card being so good will push people to take cards when they're not really good at all. In fact, I used to sometimes be okay with taking 2 brooms, and now I really don't like more than one. Yeah. One's fine. But taking more than one can be kind of bad sometimes, in my opinion.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
But yeah, I think that covers pretty much everything that I had. Just again to sum up, little tips. I'll just give a real short summary. Have an open mind when you play Arena. Don't just follow a tier list blindly. It's not bad to do in the beginning, but at some point you want to turn it off and start to think about why you're taking stuff and what does the card actually do for your deck. Those type of things. And also it'll make you grow as a player. And like I said, also we talked about this all the time, experiment. Try cards that you wouldn't normally try. And you might not have as good a success on that specific run, but you might learn something that'll actually help you in another run later. You know what I mean? So,
right.
And that's the big thing. Open mind, have fun with it and just try things and be open to not just taking what's safe all the time and try some new things. So,
yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts on it?
Well, I just to go on that front, I started drafting Hunter at the beginning of this meta.
Yeah.
And it is a terrible class. It is truly awful. but because I spent the time and I lost probably 4 runs at really 5 runs maybe, and did really badly, I figured out the ways to draft it and what works best. And now I have a very high win percentage with Hunter because I put in the time to figure out what cards are good. I was talking to one of our Arena friends the other day, and he said he was winning with Warrior. And I thought, that's insane. There's no way to win with Warrior. And then he explained to me what he was doing a little bit, and he's right. And he found a way to do it. And I'm not saying you should always take Warrior, but if you want to have fun, there is a way to do it. There's more often a way to do something if you experiment and you play around and you find a way that's fun or that's more and effective. You can make things that are bad work because they're not actually bad. They just don't work in the context of the current situation. So if you can change that context or you can change the situation, then you can make things that you would not normally be good into good cards or good classes or good decks.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think that's about going to do it for the 6th episode of the Kelcast. You can join us live 8 p.m. Eastern every week on Twitch or download the podcast wherever you get your podcast every Monday. You can also find me on Twitch where I stream daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Or you can find me, the podcast on YouTube for if you want to see the live stream version. And you can also find me on Twitter at Keludar. That's Keludar. I'm not even sure what we're talking about next week, but we're going to figure something out. Do you have an idea what we're talking about?
I actually have no idea.
That's okay. We'll figure something out, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure we'll have something. I can go. We've got a whole list of fun things to do. Maybe next week can be our 12-win Mega Threat episode. Huh?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you to John Laux for the music again for the beginning and the end of the episode. It definitely adds to the flair of the show. This has been the Kelcast. I'll see you next week.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Okay. Kellen, I gotta get something the off my chest.
What?
I love Valheim. I love this game so much. I love it. It's so good.
I played it for like 10 minutes and I got bored when it got nighttime and I almost died. So I didn't.
Here's the thing. I like survival games, and here's the thing. My one friend is really, really into Minecraft, and I know that Minecraft is kind of it started out as a simple game, but they've added so much complexity to me that it's kind of overwhelming. Like there's just so many. When I play a game, I want to be good at it. And there's just so many things to learn about the game and so many little things. And anyway, one thing I like about it is it kind of takes a lot of those elements and it kind of simplifies it. Like there's still the element of danger. But there's things like you can build a fort and like you don't get punished by losing resources when you tear it down. Like when you tear something down in that game, you get everything back. So like if you make a mistake, like I don't know, like something a floor tile doesn't link up where you want it. You like some games you literally have to go chop more wood because you did that. This game is just like, here, just take it back, try again. So you can experiment and try around, and it doesn't. So but it still does have things that are challenging. Like there's portals you can build in the game, which you need resources for, and you have to get to that point to build a portal. But the nice thing is there's still some form of, not say punishment, but like you can't carry the most valuable resources through the portal. You still need to figure out a way to bring it back with your ship or something like that. So you still have like trade lines. So it's cool because they make enough of the game accessible that it's not like terribly difficult, but yet there's still enough difficulty where I always like games that have consequence, where like, for instance, you die in a crypt and it's not like you just get your shit back. Like you have to either have a backup pair of stuff or you're going to run there naked to get it. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So like, but for me, is that annoying sometimes? Yes. But it's also fun because you have these memories of like, oh man, do you remember that time that like we went out and we were trying to get our copper back and we got attacked by the sea serpent and blew up our ship? Like it sucks in the moment, but those are things that a lot of games nowadays are too fucking accessible. Like they make it too easy. You know what I mean?
Okay, sure, I see it.
I like games that actually give you know, if you're not gonna have good stories to tell if like it was easy, you know what I mean?
Right, it's too easy. Yeah.
That's why like I think a lot of people get into speed running and stuff because the games are too easy to begin with, but if you speed run it, then like they people have to add their own challenges to games because they're just not challenging enough anymore. But they're it's starting to come back. That's my thing. I want games that are challenging and have consequence and like things actually matter. And it's not just like, you know, oh, you died. Well, here's all your stuff back. And like, you know, just keep playing. I don't know.
I think that's cool. Yeah. You want it to be something that people, or that you can, I don't even know the right way to say this, but you want it to be a real gaming experience where you have to use your brain and think about stuff instead of just getting handed your next reward.
No silver spoons in games anymore.
Okay, fair enough.
The gamers of this generation are too freaking spoiled.
Okay.
That's my fucking, you know, man, I'm going to have to bleep like 10 times on this one.
Yeah, you're going to have to blow out your bleep button.
Bleep. All right, that's it.
All right.
Over and out again.
Bye.